In this video, we will be covering the following topics: if statements, booleans, boolean expressions, logical operators, and of course, to end out the video, we would go over a programming exercise. To start off with, we need to define what an if statement is. And an if statement is a decision structure in programming that allows us to execute or not execute some code depending on the results of a condition. Essentially, a decision structure allows us to make a decision. How we make that decision will be up to the problem that we are trying to solve, but ultimately, every decision that we make and every condition that we are testing to see whether or not we make that decision is going to be needs to have an outcome of either a true or a false. This is when in programming we are going to start emulating some of the logical actions that we take in real life and mirror them in programming. One of the things that we do in real life that we do often, maybe sometimes without even thinking about it, is making decisions. For instance, everyone has waken up in the morning, and as they are getting ready to get out of the house, we have all made a decision on what to wear. And making that decision has a lot of factors built in, but most likely the decision that you are making will be based off of the weather outside. So if it is cold outside, you're going to wear some more layers. And if it's not cold outside, then you won't wear some layers. But the point is, you are making a decision and there is a certain condition that you are going to consider. So in our example, the condition that we're going to consider is the outside temperature. So I just created a new variable, outside temperature, stored the number 45 in there. And with this variable, we are going to be able to make a decision on what to wear depending on the outcomes of the temperature. So this is our first if statement, which also introduces the first key word in Python. So keywords, otherwise known as reserved words, are words specifically that Python has set aside to be able to perform some logic. As we go throughout the course, we'll learn more keywords, but keywords and reserved words are therefore reserved and cannot be used in any other setting than to do the logic for what it was meant to be created. So the word if cannot be used in any other setting than to create an if statement. You can't have a variable called if because, again, it is a reserved word. And the if statement is also our first introduction into a nested block statement. So you can see here, this is our first introduction of using a colon. Anytime you see a colon, it means that you have the ability to nest some code within it. So the whole point of if statements is to be able to execute or not execute, depending on the results of a condition, the code that is nested inside of the if statement will be what we execute or not execute. So we are going to print it is cold outside if the outside temperature is less than 45, and we'll test this out. Currently, let's change our weather into 55. So the outside temperature is 55. Let's run this, and in the terminal, you see nothing. And the reason why we don't see anything is because the outside temperature being 55, 55 is not less than 55. The condition has resolved to a false. And when the condition resolves to a false, the nested code inside of that statement will not execute. And the nested code is done by tabbing from the line in. So if you see here, you have your colon. If you are aligned with the if statement, if you press tab, you will be able to get aligned in. And that's how we nest statements inside of other statements. But let's change this up. Let's change this into 35 degrees. And if I run this now, you'll see the message, it is cold outside. And that again shows up because now the condition has resolved to a true. So now that we've seen our condition resolve to a true and resolve to a false, and it not displaying the message of it is cold outside, what can we do if the outside temperature is not cold? Well, we saw if the weather is warm enough, then we don't see the it is cold outside message. Well, then what are we going to do when it is warm? Well, we have access to something called an else statement. And an else statement is attached to an if statement and will trigger if the condition is false. So if you take a look at this, you will see that the key difference between an if statement and an else statement is that the if statement has no condition. I'm sorry, the key difference is that the if statement has a condition while the else statement does not. So this is a way for us to be able to, depending on whether the condition is true or whether the condition is false, to have an outcome for both. So right now, if I run this test again, we will see it is warm outside because the outside temperature is currently 65, is not less than 45, which is that it is warm outside. And again, if we switch this back to a colder temperature, then we will see that it is cold outside. We have now discussed both scenario of condition of the if statement resolving to a true or resolving to a false. So the term of true and false are terms that we use in real world, but it has a special meaning in programming. So I'm going to replace these print statement with these two lines of, and you can see here I have added two lines of code, outer where it goes true, outer where it goes false. Don't worry about the squiggly lines right now. This replit wants to fix our code from a if else statement into something called a ternary operator, but it's okay. It's a stylistic choice. What I really want to concentrate on is the actual concept for now, so ignore the squiggly line if you can. But either way, what I really want to highlight again is this word true and false. And as you can see, it's not highlighted like the other words. The reason why it is because these are our fourth data type. These are Boolean values. So unlike strings, ints, and floats, Booleans are a little bit special because for Booleans, there are only two values of true and false exactly in these words. And every time before where I mentioned that the conditional in that if statement is going to resolve to a true or a false, these values were what it was being resolved into. So every if statement is going to have a condition. That condition is going to be resolved either as a true or a false, and that Boolean is what's going to allow us to, again, execute or not execute certain statements within the if statement. So ultimately, an if statement is a way for us to be able to make a decision in programming. It allows us to, depending on the outcomes of a condition, execute or not execute some amount of code. But not all decisions made in life is a decision of yes or no or true or false. In this situation, we started with the simple scenario of a cold weather. Yes, it is cold, or not, it is cold. But as mentioned previously, there are many different scenarios where it simply is not just a one or the other. It becomes an option of choosing between A, B, C, and D. And an if statement can handle that situation of being able to handle more than one outcomes. To talk about the situation where we have more than one outcome, I want to talk about my background in web development, specifically access levels and granting users certain access roles. So in a setting of a school where you have administrative offices with professors or instructors to students to auditing students, there's a school system where, depending on what kind of access level you have access to or are limited to certain information. So administrative faculty have the most access, professors and instructors might have less, students even less so, and auditing students probably the most minimal access possible. So whenever a user is logged in, we have to make sure and check to see what kind of access level you are so that I give you the proper credentials. So my next if statement is going to start off with this. If the access level is equal to an admin, and it is highlighted in red because I haven't created a variable for access level yet, but here it is. So let's say that the user who is currently logging in, his level is admin level. So I check to see if the access level is equivalent to the admin level. This is another type of comparison that we can have in our condition. Previously, we looked at the less than comparison, where we were comparing outside temperature to a numeric value using the less than operator. Here, we are using the access level variable and comparing it with the admin string to see if they are equivalent to one another. So the comparison operators that we have in Python, as you can imagine, with the less than means that we also have a greater than. We can also have a greater than or equal to, or even a less than or equal to. They're just different variations of the comparison operator. But the equals operator is the one that we are using in this situation to see what kind of access level you have. So if your access level is admin, then you get the user role of 9, which is a really high value, and so you have access to a ton of information. So I still need to check to see, well, if you're not an admin, are you an instructor, or are you a student, or are you an auditing student? Your immediate instinct might have been to just create another if statement, but we actually have access to something called an elif statement. And like an else statement, which cannot exist without an if statement, the elif statement can also not exist without the if statement. But the word is kind of funky because you see the L, so you're thinking, okay, so this is an else statement, but else statements, as you've seen before, have no conditions. But so this is an if statement, which means that it may seem like an else statement, but hey, there is a condition. So an elif statement is kind of in the middle where it does have a condition, and it is like an else statement because it has to be attached to an if statement. So I'm using an else if statement or elif statement to see, hey, if you are an instructor, then user role as you get is 8. So now that we've checked to see whether you're an admin or an instructor, I'm going to add 2 more elif statements to check in to see if you're a student and an audit. So depending on your access level, as you can see, admin gets the role of 9, instructor 8, student 7, auditing 6. As you get lower and lower access levels, your user role value goes down and down so that you are limited to less and less information. So this is a way for us to be able to create an if statement along with a chain of elif statements to make a decision based off of multiple outcomes. It's no longer just a yes or no. Now it is a decision between A, B, C, and D. Before we started writing this code down, I did mention that if given and kind of individual instincts goes, you could have just written all of these as just normal if statements. And the fact is, it would work. If you just have 4 if statements instead of the previous if elif statements, the logic still would work. However, an if statement by itself, it's considered a decision structure. And because it is its own decision structure, one outcome because it is a decision structure, the condition must always be evaluated for every single decision structure, and some sort of result must happen. So if I were to use this logic to create four if statements, I would check to see whether you are an admin for the user who is currently logged in, which they are. And I would say, oh, you are an admin. Yes, access level is equal to admin. I will give you the user role of 9. So I've already figured out that you are an admin level, but because these are all individual decision structures, I still have to go with the rest of these three if statements and check to see, are you an instructor, are you a student, or are you auditing? Even though I know for a fact that you are an admin, I am taking the time to check these conditions, even when I know it is not possible that they are going to be true. Which brings us back to elif statements. So elif statements, again, cannot exist without an if statement. So that means that these statements are considered a single decision structure. And because this is a single decision structure, only one outcome is possible at a time. So now, if I were to run this logic again, I would check to see, are you access level admin? Yes, you are access level admin. I will give you the user role level of 9. And because these are all statements attached to the if statement and only one outcome is possible, and I have found that outcome, I no longer need to check the rest of these statements, saving ourselves a lot of time in terms of having to check the rest of this logic. So figuring out if statements and utilizing if statements is understanding what kind of problem you are working on and seeing whether you need if statements or else statements, or if you need if statements and elif statements, or if you need if, elif, else statements. So else statements we consider as the catch-all statement because the else statement first must come last. The else statement will always be attached to an if statement, but it will also be the last statement that gets attached. And the reason why it's the last statement that gets attached is because, again, the lack of a condition. So since the else statement is lacking a condition, the only way for the else statement to trigger is if all previous statements resolve as false. In our first example, we only ever saw the one if statement, so it may not have seen like the else statement was waiting for long for it to execute its code. But here, let's say that someone is trying to access our computers without being signed on at all. Well, that means that their user role is 0. So if you're not an admin, you're not an instructor, and you're not a student, and you're not even auditing, that means you're not in the system of the school, and therefore I should give you a role of 0 so that you don't get access to anything. So with the combination of if, elif, and else statements, you are able to make a decision based off of the conditions that you have for the problem that you're trying to solve. Lastly, what we're going to be covering is logical operators. Logical operators are a way for us to be able to help make a decision where we have more than one condition to consider. So in both of our previous examples, we were making decisions based off of a single condition, outside temperature, and what kind of access level you are. Well, like many decisions in the real world, you are not only limited to one factor to make your decision. Sometimes you are dealing with multiple factors. For instance, same thing with getting ready to get dressed. The outside temperature is not the only scenario and factor that we are taking in. We are probably taking in the factor of what is the actual weather like. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? Is it misty? So, on top of the temperature, we might be considering, well, what is the weather like? Same thing with the access levels. we might not only consider what kind of access level you are, but we might also be checking to see where you are logging in from. Are you logging in from a connected system from within the school, or are you doing a remote connection from your home? And depending on all of these different factors, the decisions that you make might be different than when you only have considered one factor. And that's what logical operators allows us to do, is to combine multiple conditions together. There are two logical operators, the AND logical operator and the OR logical operator. They both allow us to combine as many conditional expressions as we want. So you can see here we have an example of using the AND operator to combine conditional statements that resolve to these booleans of true or false. So if I were to have two conditions that they both resolve to false, and I use the AND statement, it resolves to a true. However, if I have a false on one or the other, then the final result of that will be false. And that is because when you are using the AND logical operator, anytime you have a false in any of your AND combined statements, it is going to make the entire results of the combination of the Boolean expressions to a false. So figuring out the purpose of logical operators is trying to figure out which operator do you need to have for your scenario. If you want your conditional statements for all of them to be true for you to resolve a true statement, then you're going to be using the AND operator, because if you have a false in any of your conditional expressions, then you're going to end up with a false Boolean value. Oppositely, the OR logical operator allows us to, again, combine conditional statements, but it allows us to be able to only get false when the entire of our expressions are false. So you can see here for the first three examples, true or true resolves to a true, false or true resolves to a true, and true or false resolves again to a true. So similarly, like how with the AND operator, if you have a false, the entire statement becomes false. The opposite of that is true for the OR, where if you have a true in any of your expressions, then the results of that will be true. And using the AND or the OR logical operator, you have the ability to combine many different types of conditions. So here I can add a AND keyword and check to see if the outside weather is rainy. So if the outside temperature is less than 45 and the outside weather is rainy, then I will definitely need to wear a outerwear, but also probably an umbrella. And you can again use the OR operator to create a decision structure where if you only have a single true, then the results will be resolved to a true. So to recap what we covered today, we started off with learning about what a if statement is, which is a decision structure that allows us to execute or not execute some code depending on the results of the condition. How we evaluate the results of the condition is based off of Booleans. So Boolean is the fourth data type that we've learned, and is a bit special because it only has the two values of true or false. And again, it is used in conditional statements to determine the state of the condition and that what is going to be the results of that condition. A Boolean expression is just a statement of code that becomes a Boolean. So when we talked about conditional statements and conditions, all conditions are Boolean expressions because anytime you are comparing two values, some sort of result must be, the result being true or false, must resolve and happen. So same thing here, these are all Boolean expressions because they all resolve to either a true or a false. And in fact, even these are considered Boolean expressions. And then lastly, we have logical operators. So logical operators are keywords that allows us to combine multiple Boolean expressions or conditions together and allow us to alter the results of the Boolean expression. So it is reducing multiple Boolean expressions that all resolve to their own Boolean values and combine them all into a singular Boolean value. And to finish off this video, let's talk about the programming exercise of this video. So for this video, I would like you to create an if-else statement and an if-elif-else statement that helps you make a decision. It can be any kind of decision you want. It could be something that's related to your work. It could be something that's related to your personal life. Anything in terms of when you are comparing values, I think comparing numerical values is probably the easiest way to go through. For instance, one quick example I can think of off the top of my head is exercises. How, depending on how many reps or how many sets you do, you might be more tired. And if you reach a certain threshold, you might need to take some recovery drinks. So creating two different statements of an if-else where you're only limited to one of two outcomes, and creating an if-elif-else statement where you are required to make a decision between multiple outcomes will again help you understand how to utilize if-else statements and if-elif-else statements. But that is all for this video. Thank you for watching.